When we think of a constitution, we usually think of this one. Our founders were able to create the world's first free country, even though the fundamental principle of inalienable rights was only partially understood at the time. Our constitution was the world's first, and has served as a model for dozens of other countries. There have been many problems, of course, such as the disasters resulting from the words general welfare and regulation, the coining of money, and so on, but that does not warrant throwing it out. The process of gradual incremental change has worked well in the past and probably will be adequate far into the future. The predominant view is to assume that the writers had great wisdom that has since been lost, and all we can do is try to figure out what they really intended. I say it is time to abandon that approach. We now understand the fundamental ideas just as well as they did, and I will claim that what I have been presenting in these videos is the result of an even better understanding. It is entirely possible for us to write the ideal constitution, a model toward which we can mold our current constitution. Anyone can draft a model. No permission is required. Let us examine the reasons why such a document is necessary in the first place. Our caveman ancestors of millions of years ago lived in a state of anarchy. Over the centuries, leaders and rulers of various kinds have experimented with methods of keeping the peace. The need for a governed society is driven by the nature of our species. As I've been explaining all along, the principle of inalienable rights is at the center. The logical progression is for some men of a society to take on the task of protecting the rights of all. That is, they form a government. How do we make sure that they and those who replace them do the right things? We write them down. Our documents lay down the rules to govern the entire country. The top-level document, our Constitution, establishes the backbone of our government. It contains the fundamental statement of its existence, why it was created, what it was intended to do, and how we intend it to operate. Now, as it happens, America started as a group of colonies, each with its own government, and were later unified into one country under a top-level government. The primary thing that a constitution must do is state that the initiation of physical force is banned, and that it is the task of government to enforce the ban. Now, why is that? As an agency of defense, the only tool of government is the use of physical force, and the only proper use of it is retaliatory. Men cannot properly delegate any other task to government. Men have no right to steal, assault, or enslave others, no right to forcibly enter the economy, so a government must not do these things either. We must always remember that a government is a highly specialized servant. A government is not a maid, not a teacher, not a cook, not a doctor, not a parent, not a ruler, not a tyrant, not a thug. A government is a powerful and well-disciplined bodyguard, established and maintained by the very people it is intended to protect. This is government's sole purpose and the only reason for its existence. As I explained in an earlier video, men have the right to create a proper government because such a government violates no one's rights. It is valid to conclude that everyone benefits from a proper government. It is in everyone's interest, even those who cannot consent to its creation because they have not yet been born. Any statement in opposition to the proper function of government amounts to saying that you are quite happy if others steal from you, maim you, or kill you. It is a statement that in your judgment it is acceptable to be forced to act against your judgment. This, of course, is a contradiction, gibberish that can be ignored. So the source of government authority is the principle of inalienable rights. No consent from the government is necessary. If you preferred to state it another way, you could say that there is simply no legitimate way to oppose the creation of a proper government. Be sure to give yourself plenty of time to grasp that. Over the centuries, philosophers have proposed the idea of a social contract. This is the notion that men must give up some of their freedoms in exchange for protection from the state, and also to promise to serve the state in some capacity, such as paying taxes and performing civic duties. Thus they believed that some sort of contractual agreement was in place, even though no one ever saw it or agreed to it. There are many other flaws in this idea, such as the fact that a one-sided agreement is not an agreement at all, and to enforce such a thing would require the initiation of physical force. We can dispense with the idea of the social contract idea entirely. It's not valid. Neither, of course, is the idea that government somehow acquires some superior power over the individual. As I've mentioned, Government is a highly specialized servant, and must always remain so. At this point, you're probably wondering about the possibility of a god. If there is a god, wouldn't he be an authority higher than both the government and the individual? And if so, where do we get the authority to create a government? I've studied religion and supernaturalism, and I find absolutely no credible evidence for them. I find only logical contradictions. I am, therefore, an unbeliever, an atheist. If someone claims to know of any higher authority than the individual, let him prove it. Call that god down out of the clouds and have him introduce himself and demonstrate his powers. If that can be done, I will happily accept his existence. Until then, the individual is sovereign. Recall those words from President Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Now, what other ideas belong in a constitution? An effective government must be powerful enough to overwhelm all actual and potential forms of evil. But this presents a risk. Such a powerful government could conceivably run amok and threaten the lives of those it was created to protect. A constitution circumscribes the power of government. It specifies the function that government will perform and the geographic area in which it will operate, and that's it. A constitution constrains the power of government to a particular geographic area and to a particular function. It specifies a limited government. What about laws? To repeat from an earlier video, a country club can have a set of rules that the members have agreed to obey. If a member disobeys a rule, the club can revoke his membership. The expelled member is free to seek an organization with rules more to his liking. A law, on the other hand, defines what action is prohibited and how government will retaliate against an individual who has broken that law. The individual can be physically restrained, locked up, or even put to death. A law is a rule of behavior backed up by the power of physical force. A constitution needs to establish the highest law of the land, the fundamental law upon which all further laws will be based, and specifies that all functions of government will be performed according to law. A constitution must specify that government recognizes the rights of the individual, and that all government procedures will be directed toward protecting those rights from violation. That is, a proper constitution specifies that government will concern itself with nothing but the protection of rights. Thus there are only two types of law that are necessary and proper: laws that forbid certain actions by individuals, and laws that dictate the actions of government. The first type bans the initiation of physical force, and the second type specifies how government will enforce the ban. The individual is then at liberty to do anything he likes except that which is forbidden by law, and the government must do exactly and only that which is prescribed by law. A constitution must establish a limited government, but not hamper the effectiveness of that government by unduly constraining it. The constitution must take into account that there will be continued developments in technology and social interactions, so it must enable the government to be continually refined and perfected. A famous passage by Thomas Jefferson that can be seen on the wall of his memorial in Washington, D.C. reads, "I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and constitutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace with the times. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors." An opening paragraph is needed to explain the purpose of the Constitution and justify its existence. It must state that there shall be a government, and that it is being created voluntarily by a society of individuals, and that none of them, including those born later, will be treated unjustly by this government. It must state that government is based upon the principle that each individual possesses the inalienable right to act according to his own judgment, and that the purpose of government is to recognize and protect that right. The Constitution must state that government is forbidden to take any action that violates the rights of individuals. As I hope I've successfully demonstrated in these videos, the essential proper role of government is well known. The preamble of a constitution must state this in the simplest and strongest possible terms to ensure that no subsequent section of the constitution, nor any local law ever enacted, contradicts it. Here's my version. Pause the video and see if you can improve on it. As government is established to protect the sovereignty of the individuals who reside within its jurisdiction, it must not permit its laws to be abrogated by the laws of any other society, must not permit itself to be subservient to any other government, and must not tolerate any other government competing with it. It must remain the dominant and eternally vigilant force. In order to be consistent in its protection of rights, government must pledge equal treatment to all, that is, all entities who possess rights. So far, the only known entities on this earth to which this applies are actual, living, separate, individual human beings, regardless of age, race, gender, or any other personal distinction. Equal treatment means that no man is outside the law. All men must be protected by the same laws, and all men must be subject to the same laws. No injustice will be overlooked. Since the only implementation of rights is through access to property, the respect for property ownership, particularly real estate, must remain foremost. As individuals often form partnerships, associations, and corporations in order to pool their resources and achieve goals otherwise unattainable, government must recognize the agreements among all parties concerning the use and ownership of property. For the purpose of illustration, the government could be viewed as a single entity, just one man, so to speak. Let's suppose we were a group of settlers on a new continent. We would claim parcels of land for ourselves, build houses, raise crops, and so on, and elect one of our number, perhaps the oldest and wisest, to create and enforce laws, that is, to carry out the functions of government. This one man who represents the government then spends his time walking unobtrusively about the country, watching for any laws to be broken, and making himself available to hear complaints. When an infringement occurs, he puts the wheels of justice in motion and does not stop until all parties are satisfied that justice has been done. This is commonly known as due process, the process that is due. We would soon discover that no matter which individual undertakes the function of government, he might eventually succumb to the temptation of altering the laws to give himself advantages over others. We would then be in danger of being ruled by a dictator. To prevent this possibility, we would divide the functions of government into several roughly equal parts and elect one man to run each part. Each man is instructed to carry out only his part and keep a close watch over the others. If one of them is found to be misusing his power, the others would have the authority to eject him and call for a replacement. Government must govern itself. These strategies are commonly known as a separation of powers and a system of checks and balances. To further increase security and to prevent the men of government from conspiring together to misuse their power, the population insists that all government functions that do not involve any confidential or sensitive information be conducted openly. The only tasks of government they permit to be performed in secret are those involving information that, if revealed, could result in a violation of someone's rights. Military defense plans, the location and content of armories, certain pieces of evidence to be used in trials, and so on. The only law that should directly affect the individual in any way is the one that deals with force. The Constitution must explicitly state that the initiation of physical force by one man against another, and only that, is forbidden by law. The law must not pass judgment on any other action of the individual. I'll continue in video number 18.